tonight.
Yes.
I'm
Very good.
overwhelmed that this many people showed up tonight. I thought maybe it'd be a very small group, and some of our usual people didn't even make it, so we would have had a quite a bit larger group. Yeah, but our meetings have been sporadic because of my family circumstance and things that I'm trying to get resolved concerning my sister's death and her estate, and getting the house sold and things moved, and it's a big job, and it's pretty much been on me to do it. So I've got a young guy's, my buddy's son, he's about 36. He's gonna take a trip with me, and we're gonna go down and rent a vehicle and bring some nice family heirlooms back. Probably have to build on an extra room to accommodate everything, but anyway, it's things are working. So for tonight, we had a series of vignettes. I only posted one of them on the Facebook page, and that was about events that are taking place in the Middle East. They will have a long-term effect leading into the Aquarian age. Many of the things that are wrong with the world, like the swamp in Washington, D.C., and the swamps that exist in other governments around the world, it's all got to be cleaned up. We can't expect the spiritual hierarchy to expend their energies in the future birthing of the Aquarian age until these things are resolved. So it's newsworthy and it's noteworthy that finally in the Middle East, we're seeing the fulfillment of a prophecy that was given to me about 13 or 14 years ago. Could have been 15 years ago. And that was from my friend and teacher, Dr. Douglas Baker, who said to me and a very small group of people in London that it would be the women in the Middle East who would rise up, as it was the women in Northern Ireland who rose up and said, enough of bombing the children, blowing up the schools in Belfast, killing innocent people, enough. And it came to an end. And it was the women who did it. We'll see something similar in Iran, a world terrorist organization. It's unfolding. The prophecy right before our eyes is unfolding, and we don't even know it. So spread the word that great changes are coming. The spiritual hierarchy said many years ago through Alice Bailey and other teachers, through my friend and teacher, Dr. Douglas Baker, that 2025, in 2025, at the time of the Wesak full moon in May of 2025, the spiritual hierarchy will meet. They're having a convocation, a gathering, to plot the future unfoldment for mankind, for the coming new age. And it's a critical time. And the swamp has to be drained in Washington, D.C. The criminals of the planet have to be brought to justice, whether it will be a Nuremberg type trial, which is I'm hoping for, because it won't come about through a legal system, because the legal system is corrupt. It'll take some kind of a military, almost tribunal, like they had after World War II, where the Nazis, the fascists were brought to Nuremberg to stand trial. And the crimes are so great that it'll take something like that. So look for that to happen. Very significant time that we're living in. Julia, do you want to say something about what you told me about the COVID vaccine and conversations you had in
Washington, D.C., yeah. So unfortunately, they don't want us to say too much to public, but apparently who got the vaccination, and there is like a lot of people just dying because their blood becoming like jello.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so they not wanted to alarm anybody, but at the same time, they're telling us we should test it for particular, I can't remember even the name of the test.
D-dimer.
Well, so just so that I can see that if I have any blood clot,
that's a D-dimer.
Or D-dimer, or opportunity or potential, because if there is some sort of signs, if even not now, it might happen like in a couple months. And that is, like, and unfortunately, when people find out, it's too late. They cannot save anybody. And they don't want it to come in public because they trying to, like, I don't know exactly what they trying to. I think just a lot of people gonna die. That's what it is. They're trying to keep it quiet, but I'm not so sure what does do good keeping quiet.
They won't keep it quiet for very long.
This was covered widely on Progressive Radio Network on the Gary Null Show. He has brought in many people who witnessed this, and this is widely known, and it's on Gary Null's show. He talks about this all the time. Progressive Radio Network.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not all. The Parliament, the EU Parliament met, and it's all going to fall. It's all going to fall. They had a conference on October 11th, and the EU was just talking about Pfizer and about all the problems. It was about 4 hours, or no, a couple hours long, and they had Croatia and Germany and I think Switzerland too. I mean, anyway, there were about 5 different countries, and they all got up and spoke and said, we want answers for this. There's a 16% increase, a mortality increase since the
16% mortality increase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In Europe?
And yeah.
Across the planet.
Right. And that especially for men or between 18 and 40, they're finding all kinds of heart.
It's not just
events.
man, unfortunately, the way they were talking about, it's not just man. A lot of problems they just don't understand because people just dying. They're not sick or anything, they're just dying. And some people get deadly heart attacks, and some people get strokes, and they become a deadly. So nobody exactly pointing out necessarily to vaccination, but they know that is the vaccination because it just over and over again, because otherwise the people are very, very healthy. For men, it's just a little bit more, I think, visible. They're just having a more so heart attack, and and it's more like it's instant. Once they have a heart attack, there's no, but at the same time, and a lot of times what happens is it seems like there's like, I think they're saying over, I don't know, 100,000, like a man gets up, everything is fine, they eat, they have fun, and then go to sleep, and he never wakes up. And so there's this blood clot, and and also strokes and deadly. So, and then when you go in case to a doctor and they discover that you have severe blood clot, apparently your blood becomes like a jello. That's how they describe it. It's very
There's a
hard
thickening of the blood.
yeah,
Mhm.
and they cannot really necessarily to fix that fast enough to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So
And-
that's why they say that now. I mean, this is like kind of like, no, they don't want to call on public, but they're just telling inside themselves, you better test, and if there is if you're carrying that whatever, then you have to get help so that you don't develop these blood clots.
So
And side effects, they don't exactly know 100% how long these vaccination effects could be, but they're so far, they're saying it could be up to, like, if you have a last vaccination, it could last like 3 years. It doesn't have to be like now. You're gonna get the blood clot, but eventually you will get some kind. Yeah, so that's a challenge. So so that's a challenging thing. So that's why it's like, okay, yeah, everybody's gonna get it, but it's just you may have a little bit more than the other people or less. I don't know. So
What about taking blood thinners now, or at least an aspirin, Terminix, Eliquis?
well, yeah. So the blood, yes, you can do that, but then obviously you don't want to do it under the control, because if you take the blood thinner, if it's you're doing without provision, or like somebody's watching you, it could also make internal bleeding. That's also dangerous, according to them. So you have to make sure that you go to the doctor, and they have to keep testing you over and over again, even during that time while you're taking the blood thinner. Yeah, because somebody went there, apparently they took the I'm not so sure exactly, it was carrying, and then they started taking the blood thinner, and apparently it was too much, too fast, I don't know, it just, they got internal bleeding, and then they got that brain hemorrhage, and they got, yeah. So that's why you want to watch out.
How many people here had the vaccination?
I had it,
I guess I'm the only one.
me too. Me too.
Anybody
Oh,
back
yeah.
there? Any of you guys have the vaccination?
Not today.
Yeah, me neither.
It
No
smelled, it
intention of
just had
trying.
a certain, my gut told me it was different than, polio or
Mhm.
mumps or
Mhm.
measles or any of that,
Mhm.
It just didn't have a ring of honesty,
It hadn't been tested a long time.
Yeah, right.
but they
Yeah.
didn't even come across as honest.
There's a lot to think about. And we were born into this world to be here at this time. And so it'll be our responsibility, if we're committed to helping mankind, it'll be our responsibility to help in any way that we can. A vignette that I didn't add to this list, and talking about helping the humanity. I'll try to make this as short as I can, because it's already 8 o'clock or near 8 o'clock. One of the things that was constantly on my mind today was, we had talked about it once before in one of our meetings, maybe 2 years ago, was what I call the crucifixion. Many of my friends in England who are theosophists also talked about it. The crucifixion of C.W. Leadbeater, who was wrongly accused of practicing certain form of what was called homosexual yoga. But it was largely a bunch of old Victorian women who pounced on him unmercifully and tried to destroy him. the thing that was interesting from the esoteric point of view is that the hierarchy members who had helped form and create the Theosophical Society withdrew about that time. That's 80, we're talking 85 years ago or more. So it would be 811, it would be 85 years ago. So our job as spiritual people and disciples, I say we're all disciples. DK says, from the humblest aspirant up to and beyond the Christ himself, we're all disciples, is to defend the teachings of the masters. And there's a lot of garbage material out there on Leadbeater being wrongly accused. Eventually, he'll be exonerated. And I'm trying to help in that process of a very great man, a very great author, a very great teacher, who was essentially crucified politically and every other way that you can imagine by the very organization that he represented, which is typical of the fourth initiation. Think of the crucifixion of Christ and the burning of Joan of Arc at the stake. And then after they've killed them off, they, oh, well, we made a mistake. And so that's what they did really with Leadbeater. Anyway, I just wanted to add that tonight. One of the things that we've talked about in the past, some of you may know this story. I talked a little bit when Lee was the first one to come in tonight. And it involved a period in my life almost 50 years ago when I was a young guy. Kind of had a somewhat of an understanding of what I was doing, but the full impact of it was even now when I look back, it's mind-boggling to think about. But one of the things that we have to do as spiritual people through meditation and through study and through service to mankind, three things that the Theosophical Society tells us that we have to do, is to construct the Antakarana. And that also involves the opening of the third eye, which I've lectured about here on several occasions. The third eye is not the pineal gland. That's only a part of the story. The actual eye is created out of etheric, mental substance that is a product of the overlapping of the throat, the brow, and the crown chakras. And where those three vortices of energy overlap is the sacred square inch. You can see it on that picture back on the wall there, the head of Minerva. We'll have to maybe show that at the end of this talk. But Manly Hall gives an explanation of it that is, he says it shows in part, doesn't show you the whole thing. He says it shows in part the phenomena that occurs at the time of the opening of the third eye. So he's only telling you part of that story. And that's something we'll discuss in detail another time. In fact, we even had a video here of one of Dr. Baker's lectures on titled The Opening of the Third Eye. And he gives brilliant drawings that he does with these pastel chalks and crayons, lovely, beautiful stuff. I remember that when he'd finished, people would scramble to get the drawings and believe that they were energized, as I believe, by his energy, and they were highly prized. But he explains it better than what Manly Hall does. And we'll show that video again another time here. Probably won't be on Zoom, but it is available for people through the website, through the Baker website. Anyway, when I was a young guy, just through, I guess, through a natural sense of duty, I was attracted to the idea of meditation at the same time every day, same time every evening, 5 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the evening. I was involved in fasting, celibacy, took the television out and threw it in the dumpster, lived a very monk-like, lama-like life. And I began to meditate, of course, read a lot of the Bailey material, Blavatsky, a little bit of Leadbeater. Didn't read any Steiner at that time. But I was immersed years before I ever became a member of the Theosophical Society. I was involved in theosophy. In fact, it even had me lecturing on a couple of occasions. It was a young group of young theosophists. There was an elderly man there that was in charge. I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the time, and he kind of took a fancy to me and had me speak to this group of young budding theosophists. Anyway, I began to keep a spiritual diary, and Baker talks in great length about the importance of keeping a spiritual diary. And it's kind of a combination of your dreams, recording your dreams, and recording the events in the world around you that have meaning. And it's through this process, which is a mental process, that you establish a rapport. It's called the antakarana, a bridge of consciousness built of mental matter between the soul and the personality. So here's my story. I think I may have told this before. Lee and I discussed it earlier this evening. He came around 6 o'clock, and I said, well, I don't know how it came up. I said, well, I'll add that to the vignettes tonight. So when I was a young guy, I had a deferment from Vietnam. I was going to college, I was studying art, but my family life, my parents, my siblings were in complete turmoil and chaos. And after about 2 years in school, I decided that I'd had enough. And I had this sword of Damocles dangling over me in the form of the local draft board. And I thought, you know, I'm 18 years old, gonna be 20. I gotta make a decision. So I went down to the local draft board and volunteered for the draft. I didn't get drafted, I volunteered for the draft. Back when nobody volunteered for the draft. So about a month after I volunteered, I got a letter in the mail, and I was drafted on April 4th, 1968, which was the day that Martin Luther King was murdered, assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. I went to Vietnam. I had a very, I remember telling a very high degree initiate elderly man who was a friend of mine. I'll tell you the story about him sometime too. His name was Dr. Joseph Busby. He had 60 honorary doctorate degrees.
Wow.
This guy was like no human being you ever met in your life. I could talk for a day about it. I mean, 24 hours straight. But I was working through spiritual, through my disciplines, and had survived Vietnam through very mystical series of events that saved my life. My horoscope shows the overshadowing of a Nirmanakaya, who is a Christ level, Buddha level being. That's what a Nirmanakaya is. They're divine rebels. Plato, as I wrote yesterday in Facebook answering the question, somebody had made a statement about something I had said, and they wanted to know who the quote was from. God geometrizes, right up there on that board there, that Blake drawing. It was who said God geometrizes, and Plutarch said that it was Plato. Plato said that God geometrizes. Anyway, I was formulating, after I got back from Vietnam, this spiritual diary that I didn't even know Baker had ever, I didn't know who Douglas Baker was, but he wrote a book about the importance of keeping a spiritual diary where you write down your dreams and what we call reading the gloss. And reading the gloss is seeing the symbols of the outer world. Carl Jung knew all about it, where you're able to see the events of the outer world and interpret them in the same way that you would your dream. Reading the gloss, it's called. So I did my time in Vietnam, and I eventually wound up working in, I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the time, and I had worked in the design department there. My brother was like a junior supervisor kind of a guy. And so we worked together. And because I was a low seniority, they would periodically have layoffs, and I got laid off. But because I was in a salaried union, I could bump over to some other department and work, whether it was running a blueprint machine. I remember working in the mail room of the engineering building, of course, at a greatly reduced pay grade. But I did that for a while, and I had a dream one night. And it was on the night of June 5th in the early morning hours of June 6th, 1976. And in the dream, I was dreaming that I was out of body, and I had astrally projected to Columbus, Ohio. And Columbus, Ohio, for me throughout my life had had a significance. Columbus was a discoverer, and Columbus, Ohio, for me was a place of discovery because I met Douglas Baker. But in the dream, I was in a little town that I knew was close to Columbus called Orient, Ohio. I never heard of it before in my life. And as I dreamed the dream, I said, wow, the Orient, that's really significant. And it's like the other half of human consciousness, the Orient and the Occident. And then I went to another town that was called Asheville. And I said, wow, that's really symbolic too. It's like from ash to ash and from dust to dust. And it's like living and dying. And then I went to a third town called Circleville, and I said, wow, this is amazing, because this is like life. It has no beginning and it has no end, and it's perfect. And Circleville and all the symbolism that comes with that. I woke up in those days at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to work. And as I was dreaming, the hour hand of the clock was reaching very nearly 5 o'clock in the morning, and I felt my bed move. And somebody was in my room. And I realized that it was my father, who I hadn't seen in years. The last time I saw my dad alive was about a week before I went to Vietnam. Never knew where he was after that. He had a drinking problem and had been very successful in the real estate business and developed, additions and subdivisions, and made a lot of money. But he drank and destroyed his life and destroyed the family, is what happened. And so I gathered my wits about me and jumped in the shower and got dressed and went to work. And I had to start a new job that day because I had been laid off from the styling department. And so I got to the building, this new job, which was just down the road about a quarter of a mile from where the building where I had been working in the design studio for this largest truck manufacturer in the world, International Harvesters, it was called in those days. And I went out to lunch with a friend of mine who's from Detroit. And he lived in Fort Wayne and worked there in the design studio with me. And so we got some apples and yogurt and stuff, went to the park and ate lunch, and then came back. And as we were pulling in the driveway, there was a guy on a big, like a road grader, only it was a mower. It was a gigantic mower that the railroad uses to cut down all the sumac trees along the railroad right-of-ways. In doing so, he would hit these uneven surfaces and it would throw up a cloud of dirt and stones. It was like, as I told my buddy, I said, this is like machine gun fire in Vietnam. I said, we got to be careful. And I knew when we pulled in the parking lot that my car, of the 60 or 70 cars that were in the parking lot, my car was the only one that was hit. And sure enough, my car had 2 dents on the hood of the stones that were being thrown up by this guy on this huge mower. I've never seen anything like it. Anyway, so I went in and told my new boss on my first day on this new job that my car had been damaged by this railroad outfit that was cutting down the right of way, the trees along the railroad tracks. And he was just the nicest guy in the world. And he called the railroad company and they sent an adjuster out, and I talked to the adjuster, and he was very helpful. I went back to work. And about 3:30 that afternoon, this is about 3 hours later, there was one phone in the office, and that was in the boss's desk at his office. And this huge sea of people, that it was just a sea of desks. It was the warranty processing center where they processed warranty claims. And he came up to me, the boss, Mr. Connors was his name, and he said, you got a phone call. And I'm thinking, how the hell can I have a phone call? Nobody even knows I'm here. Nobody knows where I'm working. How can I have a phone call? I thought, oh, okay. So I went into his office and picked up the phone, and it was my brother, who had traced me down through the personnel department and found out where I was at to tell me that my Aunt Helen had called to tell her that my dad had died that morning at 5 minutes till 5 Indiana time, the minute my bed shook.
Wow.
I said, really? I said, where's he been living all these years? He said, I don't know. He said, I think he was living around Chicago somewhere. I said, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get off work in about 25, 30 minutes. And when I get home, I'll call Aunt Helen. Okay. So I went home to my house. I lived in a big old Victorian home, huge home. My cousin and her husband lived upstairs. Her husband worked with me in the styling department at International Harvester, designing trucks. He didn't get laid off, but I did. As I pulled in my street parallel to my house, my sister pulled in behind me. And I got out of the car and she's crying, my sister who just passed away. And she said, did you hear about Mother? And I said, no. Well, she said, I took her to the Doomling Clinic, which was a cancer clinic in Fort Wayne, connected with one of the big hospitals there. And she's got advanced cervical cancer and is only going to live for about 6 months. Jeez. I said, well, did you hear about Dad? No. Well, I said, Dad died this morning at 5 minutes till 5. And I said, I'm just going in to call Aunt Helen to get the details. So come on in, let's go in the house. So I called my Aunt Helen and to get information about my father and where the body was. And she said, well, you know, he died and he lived in a little tenant farmhouse outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a little town called Orient, Ohio.
Oh, boy.
And his body is in a funeral home in Asheville, Ohio. And his belongings are in the county sheriff's office in Circleville, which is the county seat. I can't make this stuff up. But this is what happens when you construct the Antakarana. You are en rapport with your soul, and your soul is en rapport with the solar system. And the solar system is en rapport with the universe. I think it was Schrodinger who said that the total number of minds in the universe is 1. I'll paraphrase it. He said the total number of minds is 1, functioning as I forget what the term was he used, but a multiplicity. But still, it's only 1 mind. And we're not all thinking the same thoughts, at least most of the time we're not. And this construction of this Antakarana that I'm telling you about is one of the most basic and fundamentally important things that you can ever do for your spiritual life, is to construct the Antakarana. And sure as hell, if I can do it, you can do it. It just takes some effort. And we always say the Theosophical Society tells us to meditate, to read the esoteric classics, because it's harmonious. It's harmonious and it stimulates neurons of the brain that are dormant, and to be of service to mankind. And when you do those 3 things, those 3 energies are attracted to the 3 centers. Each one is attracted to study, to service to mankind, and to meditation. And it stimulates those chakras. And those chakras overlap, where these three energies overlap. In the center of them is the sacred square inch, a triangular shape. And if you look at that beautiful painting over there that Manly Hall had commissioned. We'll have to get a shot of that, Julia,
Okay.
for the people who
Oh, yeah, it's a star.
watching. Yeah, you'd say the blue
It's a triangle. but
blue
it's a star.
triangle,
Yeah, the star.
and it's that sacred square inch where those three vortices overlap that create the eye, create the lens for the third eye. All eyes require a lens. And so the way we construct the lens is through those three disciplines. Anyway, it's 25 after 8, and we're going to have to stop for this evening. If there's any questions, anybody has anything you want to say, if there's anybody on the Zoom meeting tonight, I don't think we had too many tune in tonight. It's unfortunate, but I'm okay with that. Sometimes you have more people, sometimes you have less. But I'll open myself to questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody on Zoom has any questions? Anybody there? Okay. I know a lot of people on Zoom, I got notices that they